U.S. Navy Captain Cassidy was born in Salem, Massachusetts, and now considers York, Maine his hometown. As a Navy SEAL, Captain Cassidy has been deployed twice to the Mediterranean and twice to Afghanistan, and he's a recipient of a Bronze Star. He was selected as an astronaut by NASA in 2004 and is a veteran of 2 space flights. On flight STS-127, he was a mission specialist and the 500th person in history to fly into space. 500 people. That's amazing. As NASA's chief astronaut, he currently is responsible for mission preparation, on-orbit support of crews, flight assignments, and astronaut office support for future launch vehicles. So please join me in welcoming Captain Cassidy.
We choose to go to the moon. Wow, that's such cool and powerful words, right? I mean, this gentleman's question over here, are we going to Mars? Let's all say it together. We choose to go to Mars. We choose to go to Mars. All right, I'm with you. Let's go. So as Sue said, we're working really hard to get all that plan together. And I'll touch on that a little bit, but I want to share with you kind of where we are right now in our space program. And then my personal experiences both on the U.S., comparing the U.S. and the Russian launches, because I've had the opportunity to fly once on an American space shuttle and once launching on a Russian rocket, which I feel very honored and privileged to have represented our country and NASA on that program. But I'll be really excited as an American, just like you guys are, when we're launching our people from the coast of Florida again on a rocket with an American flag painted on it. And that's really soon. That's going to be in about 2 years, a year and a half, 2 years, where there's 2 companies, Boeing and SpaceX, are working to produce a commercial vehicle. We call it a commercial vehicle. It's just basically the company that's contracted to build these vehicles for us. And they're going to be launching our folks really, really soon. So, as he said, I grew up just up the road. York, Maine is where I consider myself my youth. And when I was a young guy, I did not think that I would be here at the Kennedy Space Center talking about space. Being an astronaut was not even on my horizon. I was more paying attention to Larry Bird and Kevin McHale and Dennis Johnson than I was thinking about space. I applied to the Naval Academy and was accepted there. And even then, I didn't really have aspirations about being an astronaut. I was motivated about some SEAL guys that I met and saw at the Naval Academy. And back then, the SEAL teams were not quite so noticeable as they are today. So it was something completely unknown, and that drew me to initial career in the SEAL teams. I did 10 years in the Navy SEALs, and during that time, I met another fellow named Bill Shepard, who had been in the SEAL teams and gone on to become an astronaut. And it was through his mentorship and guidance and encouragement that that I found myself applying to become an astronaut. And I was a student at MIT in 2000 when I applied for the first time. I did not have a graduate degree. Graduate degree is not required to become an astronaut, but it's really helpful because it's pretty competitive. So that first application cycle 17 years ago, I was not picked. And then 4 years later, in 2004, I was successfully chosen to become an astronaut. Coincidentally, this is kind of fun to share with you guys. And one of my roles as the chief astronaut is to select new guys. And we just completed the process, about a year-long process from initial applications, receiving them, screening them electronically, and then finally bringing people down to Houston to interview them. And we had a final pool of 50 people, and 3 days ago, on Thursday, we made the phone calls to the 12 individuals that we just selected to become astronauts, and they will come to Houston on June 7th. So what's that, like 2 weeks from now? We'll have a big announcement on the newest 12 members of the astronaut corps. We have 44 active astronauts right now, and quite different from when I became one in 2004. We had 120 astronauts. But it's all about supply and demand. We were flying space shuttles 4, 5, 6 times a year, and each space shuttle has 7 seats in it. So you can do some quick math that tells you you're flying 35, 40 people a year, most of whom are Americans, so you needed a larger office. And then when the space shuttle retired a handful of years ago, the ability to get to space dropped off dramatically when we began relying on our Russian colleagues we basically purchase those seats. And the Russian Soyuz has only 3 seats, and it's a very small capsule. So the ability to get our folks to space drastically dropped off, and therefore the office kind of shrunk as people naturally retired or moved on, to the point where we now have 44, and again, about to bring in 12 new folks to bring us up to close to 60 astronauts. So I want to share with you, I've got about a 15-minute video that tells about life in space, but before we play that, I want to share with you the compare and contrast the shuttle and the Soyuz. The space shuttle, as I mentioned, has 7 seats. All of the training was done in Houston. All of the books that you read, the procedures and the switches and the screens, all written in English, and the person talking to you on the radio is your buddy sitting right in Houston, Texas. All very comfortable and normal for an English speaker. Contrast that with the Soyuz. You're communicating to your colleagues in the capsule in Russian. The procedures, all the displays, the switches are in crazy Cyrillic letters, where an H is an N and just blows your mind. And more importantly, the communication was a challenge for me, because spacecraft or any aviation communication is very quick. If you've ever been on an airplane and they have a channel that you can plug into and listen to the communication that the pilots are doing, it's very fast and very cryptic, and oftentimes there's acronyms, and space communication is no different. So doing that in a foreign language is really, really hard, particularly when it's a lot about numbers, and the numbers are really important, because if they tell you 12 and you hear 20 and you put that into the computer, you're going to a whole different location. So the language is a key difference. Physical size is another thing I kind of mentioned already, 7 people versus 3. The space shuttle had 2 layers, 2 levels, if you will, and each level was about the size of a big minivan, maybe. The upstairs flight deck was about the size of a minivan. The downstairs mid-deck, we call it, was larger than a minivan, maybe 2 minivans worth of space, but not very big for 7 people when you add in there the place to work, the cockpit, the place to sleep, the place to exercise, the place to pee and poop and eat and all the things you got to do. So that part was relatively small, but the space shuttle itself was comfortable to launch in, carried a lot of cargo. Think of it like a big king cab pickup truck where you have 2 rows of seating and then a large cargo capacity behind you. And that's contrasted with the Soyuz, which is about the size and diameter of 3 of the chairs that you're sitting in, maybe a little bit wider, and then draw a circle around that footprint, and that's what you're sitting in. No place for big cargo. You can take some soft bags and maybe jam them behind your head or between your legs or something, but that's about it. That's not to say that it's a bad design. It's just a different design, designed solely to get people to and from the space station safely, and the shuttle was designed to do that as well as carry cargo. The other key difference is the training location. I kind of hinted on that already, but all of the training is in Houston. For the Russian Soyuz, we spent a lot of our time, great deal of our time, over 50% of a 2-year period is outside of Moscow in a place called Star City, where we train and prepare with our Russian colleagues. So that's the shuttle and the Soyuz. And I will mention, I'm often asked this, what's it like these days to work with the Russians when things are so weird politically between our 2 countries. And I got to tell you, just to be perfectly honest, engineer to engineer, astronaut to cosmonaut, it's just people working hard to get a mission done safely. We feel very much in sync with those people, our colleagues that are working on the same switch panel, designing the same, or putting our folks in the same suit. The Russian space program doesn't want to hurt their cosmonauts, just like we don't want to hurt our astronauts. Now, that's not to say that as we get higher up in both space programs, it does get a little bit well, you can feel a little bit more attention, but it hasn't actually trickled down to impact anything that we do on a mission day-to-day basis quite yet. So we'll keep our fingers crossed on that. The final thing I wanted to share with you before we roll the video is where we are in our space program today. What are we doing? What does it mean? Do we even have a space program? Sure we do. I wouldn't be standing here if we didn't. But as I mentioned when I first got up here, our goal is to get to Mars. Now, that is a long ways away in terms of physical distance to the planet, but also with technical challenges between now and then. And all of those challenges cost money and take time, and that's a particularly challenging thing in a political environment where election cycles come and go and plans come and change. So depending if we can get a plan and stay on it, which I hope we're on that track right now, that as Sue mentioned, kind of the late 2020s, if I'm a betting guy, I would probably say early 2030s, where a spacecraft with human beings will be going to Mars. And I think the delay will probably be in a lander, because if you just go all the way there and can't land on it, you guys will all laugh at us. Like, what the hell are you doing, designing a mission to go look at it and not step on it? So that's just me personally thinking we're going to need a lander. So that'll probably delay us a little bit longer. But nonetheless, that's our vision. And this Orion spacecraft is being built right now. At the Kennedy Space Center, you can walk into a building about the size of this auditorium, and they have the actual vehicle of the Orion. It's already built. The pressure vessel is there. They're hooking up electronic boxes and computers to it right now. Every day, as we speak, it's getting more and more built. That first one is going to not have people on it. And we're anticipating the plan that's on PowerPoint charts all over NASA says probably 2018, sometime late 2018. I kind of think it'll spill into 19 just because the big gigantic rocket that we have, that we are developing called SLS, which is akin to the Saturn V rocket that you know from the videos here in the library. That will probably put us into 2019, and that vehicle will launch around the moon and then return. And the most important test that will do for us is to test the heat shield. Because before we put people on that thing, we want to know that we can safely return them. And when you come back from space, it's not the same coming from low Earth orbit where the space station currently is, or where the space shuttle was, compared to coming back from the moon or from another planet. Your speeds are far greater, and the angles of which that you can hit the atmosphere have to be more dialed in, very specific trajectory. So the heat shield is of critical importance to our safety, and we really need this uncrewed mission. NASA just completed a study to determine if we could accelerate that time frame a little bit and put people on the first one, and we decided it was probably not quite worth the risk to do that. So we're going to have people on the very next capsule, and that I anticipate will be 2020 or maybe 2021. So that's the kind of time frame that this Orion spacecraft is going to go around the moon. And you're looking at me going, well, you just said Mars. Why are you talking about the moon? That's where we're going to test out all the things, make sure that spacecraft can work and function and everything's good, and then we'll build it up. And when we work, as Sue mentioned, that our European counterparts are building a service module that comfortably then get to Mars, because you can't really just go for 7 months inside a little capsule. It would be really, really tough duty. So we need the service module contraption with the Orion, and that together will push us into the later part of 2020s and early 2030s. So that's kind of the roadmap for us. The other question related to that I'm often asked is, how do you feel about these commercial companies who are competing with NASA? Well, we absolutely don't feel like it's competition with NASA. Boeing and SpaceX in particular, because they're the ones that most people hear about because Elon Musk owns it, and he's a famous guy and in the news and things. And absolutely not competition. It's expensive to get to Mars, and this Orion spacecraft, as I already described, will get us there. But it's also hard given NASA's fixed a budget that we have, just like your family. If you're doing your things that you got to do, if you want to take on another thing with your family budget, it stretches your family budget. So NASA's budget includes the space station and going to Mars. If we can kind of transfer some of the logistics to other companies to take over the low Earth orbit and the space station piece, then that frees up more resources, money, time, people to focus on getting to Mars. And that's how we see this as a great partnership between NASA and companies that are out there in our nation working really hard to achieve these goals together. So that's my kind of view on where we are in space program. So with that, I'll set the stage for this short video and take some questions, and we'll be off and running. So I spent 6 months on the International Space Station. It seems like just yesterday, but as I look at my watch and tells me it's 2017, that means it was 4 years ago already. And it was a fantastic time. Just unbelievable to be up there for that amount of time. There was about 2 years of preparation to get to that point, and I launched on a Soyuz with 2 Russian cosmonauts. And let's get the video rolling here, and it'll kind of walk you through. So I was part of the 35th and the 36th expeditions to the space station. We changed crew members out every 3 months, so that's why there was 2 numbers associated with my 6 months time up there. I said goodbye to my family in like February of 2013 in Houston. I got on a regular United Airlines flight, flew to Moscow. In Moscow, we have a bunch of tests and exams and some ceremonial things until we hop on this Russian plane and fly from Moscow to Kazakhstan. And here's where the video picks up as Pavel and Sasha and myself entered the Cosmonaut Hotel, where we spent 2 weeks in quarantine, which is intended to keep sicknesses and germs out of the space station, but really it's like white-collar prison. You're just kind of stuck, and every day is the same, and you can't wait for the spacecraft for the day to come. But there's just a couple of days you do some cool stuff, and this day is one of them. It's our fit check day, where we go to our actual capsule, and just like a new car smell, it's a real new capsule, and you're in it for the first time. You can put your things where you want to, make sure your seat liner is molded exactly to you, and then we button it up, and the next time we actually see that thing is 10, 12 days later on the actual launch pad. During those 10 or 12 days, we do some various activities, go to see some museums and things like this, but really the intent of it is focus on mission preparation and get ready to go. About 3 days before launch, our families show up, and mine arrived from Houston, my extended family, and I get to see them a little bit, but we're in quarantine, so not a lot of contact with them, but it's really cool to share this time with your family. Around that same time is when the spaceship rolls out on a rail car from the assembly building out to the launch pad. Launch pads are generally far away from population. That's a good thing, right? It's by design. And there's a couple Russian guys smoking cigarettes, hard hat, back, come on, back, rise it up, yep. And like 30, 40 minutes later, the thing is vertically standing on the launch pad. It's an amazing process to watch. And later on that night, this is like 2 in the morning, where we put our spacesuits on. I said goodbye to my family through a glass wall, say bye, I'll see you later, and hopped on this van that you see. And what you can't hear in the video is cheering and loud and screaming and everybody happy and excited. And we get on that van, it's completely quiet. And to me, it felt like going into a mission in the SEAL teams where all this hype was done. Now we're on a helicopter, and it's all about going to get the job done. And Pavel and Sasha and myself climb from right here, get into this tiny little elevator, and ride this elevator up to the top. The capsule is so small, there's no room for any helper to help you get suited and strapped in. So you do that by yourself, one by one, buckle everything in. This is about 2.5 or 3 hours prior to liftoff, and that's so that all of the launch pad activities can get completed and people can leave before. But during that time, you're relatively bored, but they play some music and some joking around. But around a half hour before, you start to think about, oh man, it's getting real. about 10 minutes before you actually have some switches to do, about 3 minutes before you close your visor and turn on the airflow and you're intently watching, down to 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and boom, the rocket lights and off you go. Now, do you think it's like, you'd think it would be this massive kick in the pants and just throw you off the launch pad, but it's really not like that. The thrust is calculated so that it's just enough to get this heavy thing off the pad, and then as fuel burns, you have the same thrust, and now you're getting lighter and lighter with the same thrust, and so you're starting to accelerate. But that initial 5-10 seconds, you almost can't tell you're off the pad. The numbers are changing and some things, and you generally know that you're going because it's kind of bumpy, as Sue described, but it's quite something. And then about 30 or 40 seconds into it, you really feel this acceleration, and zoom, you're off you go. The Soyuz is a 3-stage rocket, which means one engine burns for a little bit, the fuel gets used up, and some explosive bolts separate a section of the spacecraft, and it falls away. And then another section happens for a couple minutes, and the third stage completes the burn, which all is about 8.5 to 9 minutes long, and then you're successfully in orbit. And our particular Soyuz, we were one of the first ones to do this shorter rendezvous profile, where from launch to docking to the space station was just 6 hours. And so after just a couple orbits of the Earth, we're zooming in and we see this space station looming bigger and bigger. At first, it's just this tiny dot that looks like a star on the horizon, and as you get closer and closer, it fills up your whole window, and it's this massive hunk of metal that it's going 17,500 miles an hour. And our little spacecraft is also going that fast, plus a little bit, plus like a tenth of a meter per second to close the gap and then slowly connect the two spacecraft. It looks very slow and controlled, but think about in real space how fast those two machines are going. Our heads are behind that little window on the left-hand side that you saw. The middle part is a transfer trunk, so there's no people in there. And we're really just driving the crosshairs into each other to line it up and get connected. And then you feel the big clunk, 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 and the things settle out. Metal hooks drive together and make everything rigid and stiff. Then we equalize air pressure, and then it's time to float into our new home. And that's a really neat feeling. We had 3 people waiting for us in there: Chris Hadfield, a Canadian, Tom Marshburn, and another Russian guy. And so we floated in. Our 3 plus their 3 made a crew of 6 people. Now, Chris Hadfield has this big black bushy mustache, so I put a fake one. I put a fake one in my pocket and teased him with that, which was pretty funny. So now you're there. Now you're on the space station. It's time to live. And how do you get used to floating? Where do you go to the bathroom? How do you make food? All that stuff is what you got to learn and or get used to again if it's a returning flight. Here's what it looks like inside. And watch, it doesn't take much to push around. You can tell I was new to it there as I hit the computer. You get better and better and more efficient and controlled as you practice. But you can see it really doesn't take much effort. However hard you push off the wall is how hard you're going to crash into it on the other side. So slow and controlled motions is all it takes. And yeah, this part right here is the main central area of the space station where that video section was. So what else do we do besides goof around and float? It's the main purpose of our time up there is to perform experiments, research, science. That's what we're there for. And I would say probably 60% of our time each week or each month is devoted to just that. And here's some examples. This is a virtual reality robot that right now is on the inside of the space station, but ultimately you can see putting this robot on the outside of the space station, and we remain inside in the safety of the space station and can control the robot to fix and do things that would otherwise have taken a human to do. Put this suit on here that's right behind me. These little guys here, those satellites, they have MIT has a robotic competition, and middle school kids around the country can compete and write their computer code, and then we on board the space station have these robots manipulate an obstacle course and do various things, and the students are the ones whose code does that. So it's a really neat robotic competition. We have several different glove boxes. This is a stubborn one, doesn't want to push in, but you can imagine for science experiments that have off-gassing or fire or particulate that could crumble away, we want to contain that. And so we have these different, these experiment containers there. So that's the bulk of our time, really, is doing all of that research. And we're not the experts. The experts are all over the world on the ground, and we're talking to them, pointing the camera. Is this the knob you want me to turn? Is that the result you're looking for? That type of thing. Another big chunk of our time is spent doing maintenance, fixing broken stuff and tending to things that aren't broken and hopefully they won't. This particular device was the filtration system on our water processor. We recycle about 90% of our water that's up there, which includes urine and sweat, and so you're drinking yesterday's coffee effectively is what you're doing. So you want nice clean filters on board the space station. The cupola is this window here that's this kind of like a tank turret in the bottom of the spaceship that you can get down in and see all these beautiful sights right below you. There's what the horizon looks like. That's I think that's Florida at night. Different bodies of water and deserts. You can see bodies of water at night were one of my favorite things to look at because that's where all the people live, right? People like to live by the water, and therefore it's all lit up. And seeing that at night is really fascinating. Hygiene is another big part of our time. You know, I like the mohawk look. Yeah. But watch the hair float away in the air. Yeah. So when you lose something, it's lost in the air conditioner. It doesn't just fall to the ground. That's a kind of neat thing up there. But we don't have a shower. It's all about just baby wipes and maybe wiping off with a bar of soap somewhere. But there's no shower, which sounds gross for 6 months, but it wasn't so bad. At the halfway point is when the 3 folks that were up there already, it was time for them to go home. Their 6 months were over. And so we said goodbye to Chris and Tom and Roman, and they left. And then about a week later, 3 new people came, an Italian, Luca Parmitano, another American, Karen Nyberg, and then a Russian guy arrived. And this next portion of the video talks about the spacewalks. I mean, Sue did a good job of talking to you about what all the equipment is like, but I'll share with you what it feels like to do a spacewalk. It's something else to be out there, but here is some of our tools and equipment. You can see the various, you're much like a construction worker. Everything has to have a tether to it or it's going to float away. The spacesuit, here it is in the video, right behind me, you've seen it, but when I got there, I had to assemble the pieces and parts that were specific to me to make it fit my size, and then we left it assembled for the whole 6 months. This is some of our tools and our equipment that we wear, and these particular things are called safety tethers. Safety tethers are much like a dog leash. There's a small retractable force so that if you did let go, it would pull you back, just like it's happening here in the video, to wherever you have the hook connected, which we usually leave where the airlock hatch is, you know, our safety entrance back into the spaceship. So we always have the safety tethers connected, and we use, in addition to that, we use these little short ones that Sue already described to you to fix yourself to a local position so you don't get pulled back if you don't really want to get pulled back. But more importantly, our hands are the main safety mechanism. You just don't let go. And let me tell you, when you're looking down at Earth, zinging by at 5 miles a second between your toes, you're not really motivated to let go. Spacewalks are long, hard work. You're out there for 6.5 hours, 7 hours, and you just have that little drink bag. You don't have food, as she mentioned, and you're doing physical labor. So it's draining. At the end of it, folks come back in just dripping sweat and exhausted. But it's really, really rewarding because you are going out there for a purpose, to fix something or install some new component. I've been fortunate to have done 6 spacewalks in my career, and all of them except the last one went completely by the plan. And on the last one, we had this problem where my buddy Luca's spacesuit had a leaking component in the backpack where water was leaking into his oxygen system in a way we didn't anticipate. So his helmet was filling up with water, every second as oxygen was coming in. So it got really scary. His helmet filled up pretty full where the water was stuck to his eyes and his nose and his ears, got in his ears, he couldn't hear. And it was very close to his mouth by the time we actually got in. And here's the video when we got inside, and they finally took the helmet off to get him so he could easily breathe. That's a whole nother story that would take a whole nother hour to go into all the details of that, but it is pretty fascinating, and maybe we'll answer some questions about that towards the end. So the next part of the video talks about resupply and keeping the space station going, just like for everything to keep your house functioning, you got to go to the grocery store, you got to go to Home Depot and Target and or Walmart, but Target's better, right? And get all your stuff. And we need to have all that, and it comes up in different space delivery vehicles. The Europeans have one, the Russians have one, we have a couple companies in America that deliver cargo. So about every month, there's a spaceship coming with only cargo in it. And what is in there? Spare parts, gas like oxygen, nitrogen, fuel, equipment, research, clothing, you name it, food, water, it's all in there, and it's all coming in various times. Some of them can dock by themselves, but for the most part, we have to take the robotic arm and reach out and grab these vehicles when they get really close, and then manipulate it with this robotic arm to the docking port that it's going to be connected to, and then we open it up. And imagine a moving truck comes to your house, and it's full of stuff, and your house is full of stuff, and you can't put one box on the yard. Everything has to be done in a choreography, so it's kind of messy, actually. And food is a big part of what's delivered. Here, we're making scrambled eggs. You just saw the fresh fruit that was delivered. The food is really tasty. If there's ever a lack of chocolate on the planet Earth, it's because it's all on the space station. And here is, I think, strawberry shortcake, where it's rehydrated strawberries and add a little cream on there. It was pretty tasty. So there's lots of food. It's all generally prepared at the Johnson Space Center in a food lab. There are some things that just come from the grocery store, like tuna fish and nuts and trail mix and that sort of thing. But the meat and vegetables are all prepared in a lab in Houston. Those spaceships also take our trash away, and what you just saw was the spaceship burning up in the atmosphere with all the trash, and that's how we dispose of the stuff that we don't need. Exercise, a huge part. We have a treadmill, a bicycle, and a large weightlifting machine. And it turns out that's critically important for our health, not just to be fit, but to keep our bones strong and healthy. If your bones don't feel like they need to carry any weight, then they get brittle and decay, just like old age does to us here on Earth. And so weightlifting, we've learned, is the single most important thing to keep our bones strong. So we lift weights every single day. At the end of 5.5 months, it was time to hop back into our Soyuz, which was the same exact spaceship that brought us there. It stayed connected the whole time in case we needed to emergency leave, which now at the end, it's just your normal way home. From the time you push the button to separate from the spaceship, it's 5 hours until you touch down on the steppes of Kazakhstan. And during that time, some crazy physics is going on, because if you've maybe heard of the term conservation of energy, think about all the energy that you see in the spaceship on launch, all that fire and heat. That same amount of energy has to come back out when you come through the atmosphere. So the heat shield has to keep you safe from all of that. And just outside the window from your head, which is right here, is thousands of degrees of plasma. And it's really kind of a freaky feeling to know that just between your head and that wall is that level of heat. But you finally make it through the atmosphere, which takes about 10 minutes of that heating. And then the parachutes open, which is a big tumbling effect, and then you fall for another 10 or 15 minutes till you impact the ground right there. We had beautiful weather in, I think it was September of 2013, and you can see from the helicopters, they were able to get these pictures, which means they were able to land right away. I think probably 5 to 10 minutes, I don't even know, I lose track of time, there was somebody opening the hatch and pulling us out. Now, I probably could have gotten myself out on my own power, but it would have been a monumental effort. Everything is so heavy, to include the book in your hand, your head on your neck. It just, everything feels like 10 times more weight than when you left Earth. Eventually that comes back, but initially it's really nice to have people to lift you out, put you in these chairs, hand a phone and says, "It's your family," and you go, "Oh, hey, hi. I just landed," and they go, "I know, I'm watching you on TV," and you're like, "I don't want, everybody's listening here." So that then starts the process to come home. We fly on that helicopter right to a NASA airplane that's waiting in Kazakhstan, and we fly all the way back to Houston. One day later, I was back in Houston and sleeping in my own bed. So it's a pretty neat process. And we continue that every day, since that was 4 years ago for me, but we've continued to have people on the space station just like we do right now. There's 6 people up there. So what's most important, most fun for me is to hear your questions. So why don't you just fire away and we'll get going on questions.
I hope you don't think this is a silly question, but I thought that you couldn't eat food up there because there's no facilities to use other than the diaper, or the mag, sorry.
Can we eat? Yeah, I mean, you're there for 6 months, so you got to eat.
All right, so where do you go to the bathroom?
Okay, so we have a toilet, a space toilet.
Oh, you do have a toilet?
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, we absolutely, the toilet, as silly as it sounds, the toilet is a critical component of the spaceship. And for pee, there's a tube that we pee into, and it goes into the water processing system that I mentioned. And for number 2, it goes into a little canister that takes about, there's a bag insert that it goes into, and then the bag goes into the canister, and that takes about 7 days worth of number 2. And every time one of those cargo ships leaves, we fill up the cargo ship with stuff. Yes, young lady.
Have you or are you ever gonna send an animal into space?
Yeah, great question. We have sent animals, and in fact, animals beat humans into space, right? We had dogs and monkeys in the early stages. Now we have mice, butterflies. I think there's been frogs. I'm not entirely sure about the frogs, but lots of different animals, and we learn, and fish. We've even had fish on the space station, oh, spiders were one that I remembered. Spiders were cool because the first couple days their webs were all chaotic and they didn't understand, and then they figured it out. It was amazing. The spiders then just knew, they somehow got their act together, and they knew how to then build it. So animals adapt just like humans do to being in space.
What was your favorite food to eat?
My favorite food, it was seafood gumbo. It just was really good to me. I don't know. And but what I missed the most, I'm often asked this, what did I miss the most in terms of food? And that was fresh baked stuff. You don't have an oven, so the warm cookies or the smell of like Thanksgiving dinner, that kind of thing. You don't have that smell and aroma of food that you do, that we like so much here. And so I missed that a lot.
What happens if your spaceship lands in the water?
Oh, good question. So the shuttle couldn't do that. We would bail out. We would jump out before, if we knew that's where we were going, we would jump out and land by parachute. Nobody ever had to do that, thank goodness. The Soyuz, we practiced that very thing. We go to a lake and hop out. It'll float. It'll naturally float, and we just jump out one by one, and there's a life raft. And it's not a desirable situation because there's definitely things that could go wrong. The capsule could flip upside down and start taking water, but we want to get out of it as soon as we can.
So you were saying you were doing a lot of experiments up there. Have there ever been an experiment that didn't work or didn't go as planned or anything?
Oh, yeah, there's experiments like that all the time, and some degrees of success as part of any experiment, whether it's in space or not. That's why you do the research, is to learn what the boundaries of what your experiment is. Right off the top of my head, for me, I'm trying to think which one. There was a water fluid experiment where we're figuring out how fluid behaves in different ways, and turns out you can vary the shape of a container, and the fluid you can drive the fluid certain ways, and that was kind of, it didn't behave exactly how we thought initially. So anyway, good question, but it happens all the time that there's things that don't go as planned. Yeah.
What happens if you don't want to get off the International Space Station and you just stay there?
Your buddies would make you go, because somebody's got to take over your sleeping compartment. There's only 6 sleeping compartments, so we would have to throw the person out and leave them. But it happens more often than not that people are sad to leave. I mean, 6 months is a long time, and we miss our families, and we're ready to come back to Earth, but you never know if it's going to be your last mission, so it's not something that we feel happy to leave. It's kind of with mixed emotions that we often leave space.
Did it feel so much? Nothing.
Okay, if you think of it later, come on back. Yeah. Go ahead, young lady.
If everything floats around, how do you eat?
Yeah, how do you eat when everything floats around? That's a good question. This water bottle wouldn't be doing just like this. So water would be floating out of it. So for liquid, you guys know Capri Sun drinks, right, with a straw and you poke it? We have water bags just like that, where we can insert the water into this bag and drink it. And most of the food stays on a spoon. Dry food is challenging to eat, like rice is really, really hard to eat. So you generally mix rice with sauce so that it actually stays together and can eat it. But other than that, as long as it has some moisture in the food, you just eat it with a spoon, and it's pretty easy to do.
When you come back from space, how come the really hot fire when you're coming down doesn't melt the glass of the windows?
Yeah, how come that fire doesn't melt the spaceship? That's a good question. And the spaceship is oriented and constructed in a way so the bottom has kind of a curve to it. And so as that curvature of the capsule goes through the atmosphere, the heat is deflected up around it, and this is really kind of, I don't know if I'm too much detail, but the angle of the sides of the spaceship have to be angled such a way so the heat goes up around those angles. If it was a square, the heat would kind of burn the tops of the square. You know what I mean? So it has to be tapered, and that's why capsules are tapered like a gumdrop. So then the heat goes all the way around it, and you're in this little bubble inside the cocoon, if that makes sense. Good question.
You said there were 12 new astronauts. Were any of them women?
Absolutely. I can't tell you their names. It'll come out in 2 weeks, but roughly half.
Okay.
Yeah.
How do you sleep in space?
How do you sleep in space? It's actually very comfortable. There's a couple key differences. Is you don't have a pillow, or you don't have the sensation of a pillow on your head, which is kind of difficult to get used to. The first week or two, you're not quite adjusted to that. And the other part is your arms, they go inside your sleeping bag, but if they're not inside your sleeping bag, your arms kind of just float. And they can wake you up when your arms are moving around. But other than that, you sleep very well. It's very relaxing and very easy to sleep there. Yes, young man.
What happens if the window breaks?
Yeah, that'd be bad. The window is important to help keep the pressure, just like the spacesuit can't have a leak. we can't have a leak in the spaceship either. So a broken window would be a leak, and we would need to fix it immediately.
So a lot of people say that giving money to NASA that's not really launching much anymore is like all that money could be used for much better things, and it could solve a lot of problems here. So how would you respond to that as an astronaut who's actually been in space?
Well, it's a good question because I am an astronaut, but I'm also an American taxpayer. And so all of us who are American taxpayers want the money to be spent wisely and on things that we think are of value. And with every dollar spent in our government, there's people that see it should be, some should be spent one way or the other, and that's up for debate, and that's why we have elected leaders to make those decisions for us. I think that we get some value out of sending people to space. I think in very practical terms, it's an industry that has jobs, it has employment, it has a very economic impact to the things we do in our country. But I also think that there's an intangible thing about going to space that's tied to national pride. And all of us feel really privileged that we're in a country that can send people to space. And we have this national pride that this American flag that's still sitting on the moon. And it kind of is tied into our ability as a nation to be on the forefront of technology and really be leaders in technology in the world. And so I think there's kind of two aspects of it. It's really hard to argue for dollars about national pride because it's kind of like, whatever, but it means something. And if you think about how many people in 1969, the summer of 1969, were tuned in to the people walking on the moon with kind of grainy televisions and radios, think about in 2033, just to pick a year, when somebody's walking on Mars and the entire world is watching on their phones or computers or TVs live with some delay, because it'll take about 20 minutes, 15 minutes for the signal to get back, watching all that live. And to see the value of those dollars spent, I think, would be very rewarding. Yeah. All right, thanks.
Is there any booster on the International Space Station?
Booster? Whoa, good question, my man. Yeah, there is a booster. So if we did not have a booster on the International Space Station, even though there's no atmosphere, there's a little bit of what's called atmospheric drag, big fancy word, which means we lose a little bit of altitude every day. And then, so the altitude of the space station goes from about 350 miles above Earth down to about 250 miles and kind of goes up and down like this. And when it gets really too low, we have to use this booster and fire the engine to increase its altitude a little bit to kind of keep it back up to the safe heights. And when it's time for the space station to be done, we will no longer fire that booster, and it'll deorbit into the Earth's atmosphere eventually and land in the ocean someplace at a pre-planned safe location. But that's what we use the booster for.
What would happen if you feel sick in space?
You mean like stomach sick, throw up kind of sick?
Yes.
Yeah, that happens actually more than you think. When you first launch into space, your balance system is all screwed up and your equilibrium's all messed up and you're not really feeling that well. So it's much like being seasick on a boat. And so we have throw-up bags. They're really well-engineered throw-up bags, actually. They have little terry cloth things on them that you wipe off and stick it into the Ziploc. And that's what you do. If it's really messy if you don't get it all in the bag because it floats everywhere. But because it's so gross of a thing, we want to make sure that we have good plan for if you do get sick. And then there's other type of sickness too, like cutting yourself or worse yet, like appendicitis kind of thing. And we have plans for all of that. Cutting yourself, of course, we can handle. We can even do stitches and that sort of thing. Something as severe as acute appendicitis, we would have to deorbit and send the people into the Soyuz immediately and come back to Earth where it can be taken care of. There's some degree of internal debate if we could do that level of surgery on the space station. We have some medical doctors on the crew who probably could quite skillfully handle it, but there's other crews that don't necessarily have that capability. So.
If they had that bad, like appendicitis, could they make it back to Earth?
Yeah, the soonest you could get back to Earth would be about 3 hours, so, and 5 hours is the normal planned time, so certainly we think that we could get somebody back. Now there's how fast you get from landing to the medical facility, that's another piece of it, but we think that's all something that we can do. Yeah.
Thank you.
How do you solve that problem during a Mars mission? You just have to accept a little bit of risk and try medically as best you can to understand who is of risk and who isn't, but that's a little bit of a roll of the dice as well. So it's a good question. A couple more questions, I think, here, yeah.
You said you had to go to the International Space Station with a couple of Russians. Did you have to learn Russian?
I did, yep. That's a big part of the training, actually, is the communication piece. On board the space station, we pretty much all speak English. To Houston, the Russian folks communicated on a different radio down to the people in Moscow. Inside the capsule, though, the Soyuz during launch and entry is all Russian language, yeah. Young lady.
How old do you have to be an astronaut?
Well, we actually don't have an age limit on the young side or the old side, but we require a bachelor's degree in science or engineering, math, physics, chemistry, a technical bachelor's degree, and then I think it's 3 years of experience in whatever field you have. So in order to do that, it's usually people are in their mid-20s by the time they can actually seriously apply. And then if you looked at historical age of all astronauts at time of selection, I'd say the average is around 34 when you accumulate all the life experiences that make you a competitive applicant. But I'll not be telling you anything too spoiler alert to tell you that we have a 28-year-old and a 29-year-old, I think, are the two youngest in the 12 people we just called last week. Yeah. One more question. Yes, ma'am.
After you returned from space, how long did it take you to get all your strength back? And is there anything that just isn't the same as before for you?
Yeah, so returning from space is the strength part is all there. You saw the exercise equipment. Those devices do a fantastic job of keeping us strong. It's the coordination of all of those muscles that is all confused. And I would say that took about a solid month, 5 weeks maybe, to feel completely normal. Like I could go for a run, that I like to play basketball, and I could actually jump and reach for a rebound and those kind of things at about the 5-week mark. Prior to that, you're kind of uncoordinated and not really with it in terms of balance and equilibrium kind of thing. Bone density we figured out with the weightlifting, and so bone density is kind of the same. I came back with the same bone density as I launched. So anyway, happy to be here. Real honor for me to be here in this library. It's been a couple of times now that I've been back, and it feels like home to be here, not only because of the here, but I'm really close to my family right up in Maine. So enjoy your Memorial Day weekend. Memorial Day? Yeah. I can't remember holidays. That's an effect of what it is. Have a great time. Thanks very much.